Hey there all, Matt Scheckman, aka Schecky the Techie, coming to you with a little bit of a quick short. Want to just give a super basic concept here. I know we've already started jumping into more advanced things and we're certainly going to pursue that. But I wanted to go over, if you only have one instrument, heavens forbid, a guitar, a synth, an acoustic instrument, and you're looking to record or do anything with it, how do you go about doing that? What's all this about? Because when I'm talking about scaling, that's the very point. The same rules, practices, and techniques that you do for building a ginormous system like this is actually, at its heart, the exact same concept as you would do for just one instrument. So, with an instrument, what do you have to take into account? By the way, for this purpose, your voice is an instrument as well. Anything that makes sound, and I'm about to go into a much more esoteric, philosophical, scientific discussion about what is sound. So if you want, please like, subscribe, tune in, make sure the notifications are on. You'll get that when it's posted. But anything that makes sound, you could then do a couple of different things with it. Obviously, you're doing something to make the sound, whether you're playing an acoustic instrument, an electric instrument, an electronic instrument, or just vocal cords, or percussion, or anything. You're creating sound somehow. So what do you want to do with that sound? Well, a couple of obvious choices. First is recording it. Obviously, Thomas Edison first figured that out famously with his wax cylinders and his needle. We've since gone quite a ways from that, but we still use pressed vinyl and needles. So, recording it. And what is recording? It's literally just a way of making a copy, a representation of it, an analog of the sound, which even if you're doing it digitally, is still arguably an analog of the sound. Analog means just that. It's a representation equivalent in some other form or medium. So you're going to want to make an analog of the sound. Don't know what that was. Okay, sorry. You might have to cut in. Starting in. We're going to want to make an analog of the sound that is going to be the recording that could then be played back at a later date or in a different location. If I want you to hear what I'm saying now, you're not, unless I don't know something, sitting in my living room with me right now. So obviously I'm making a recording of both the lighting, the video, and my voice, the sound, for you to watch at a later date. So that's purpose one, make a recording. What's purpose two? Amplification, magnification, exaggeration. Okay? By the way, I promise at the end of this, I will give you one of the worst dad jokes you've ever heard. This may become a new trend. Schecky the Techie does dad jokes, but it will be in regards to this. But for now, you want to amplify, you want to exaggerate, you want to make sure that the sound you're creating can be heard at a greater distance or by a larger audience. Okay, that's amplification or something along those lines, so that if I'm here talking, you could hear it if there are multiple of us in the room. Maybe if it's a large room that I'm in, you could hear it all the way at the end of the room. That's the second thing that we might want to do with sound. Okay? The third thing is even simpler. Maybe I should have made that the first, and that is hear the sound. Now you go, well, wait a sec, we just went through amplification, we just went through recording. Obviously, I'm hearing the sound. Well, you are if it's an acoustic sound, if it's a resonance, if it's a sound being created by a physical media or something moving the physical medium of air. But what if it's electronic? These synths, when they're not powered up, shouldn't make any sound unless we're in some weird poltergeist thing. Okay? So, obviously, if I have them, spent money on them, like what they sound like, there's a way to hear that sound. And that, in and of itself, is its own thing. It is similar to amplification, but with the colossal difference that you will hear nothing from a typical electronic, fully electronic as opposed to electromechanical instrument. You'll hear nothing without a method to convert the electronic, in this case perhaps not analog, often synthesis or synthesized waveform, into what we call sound. So that's another task you might want to have. Again, in between the acoustic, the purely physical, I'm hitting something, it makes a noise. Now this is of course an electric drum kit, so electronic, so we're not hearing the cymbal sound, but you do hear my finger hitting something for real. So we're hitting something, you hear a noise. That would be acoustic. I'm talking, you hear the noise. I'm playing an acoustic guitar or a piano like behind me that has a resonator and a soundboard. Those are all acoustic sounds. There you might want to record or amplify it, but they're going to make sounds on their own. A purely electronic instrument, like a synth of any sort, is not going to make any sound without a series of steps to both create and then get the sound out of that device. And then in between, there's certain things like an electric guitar. If I strum an electric guitar without it plugged in, you will likely, if we mic it up close enough, hear the strings. It will still ring out like an acoustic guitar, just without the resonance or the reflections or the reverb or the natural amplification that a sound chamber might do on an acoustic guitar. But the strings themselves will still physically make a noise. However, what you're recording, what you're outputting out that instrument jack, is actually, in a very unique and fascinating way, not the same as recording an acoustic guitar. In acoustic guitar, we're recording the actual sound. Here on an electric guitar, it's going to make a sound, but we're not going to record that sound. What we're recording, what's being outputted, what we can amplify from that jack is actually a completely different sound created not by the acoustic air vibration of the string, but by the magnetic vibration of the string over the magnetic field of the pickup. And that's very critical to realize, that you could have things that are making sounds in a multi-mode way. They're doing two or more things. So starting with that, those are the three basic things you're going to want to do with sound. Create or be able to hear it through synthesis or some form of power and amplification. Amplify or magnify it using either acoustical devices or electronic devices or a combination of both, so that a larger audience, a bigger room can hear it. It could fill the room. It could come in over instruments that may already be louder. Okay. Or finally, record the sound. Have a way of putting a copy or a rough approximation of the sound as it exists in this moment in time, and some device that's going to let you hear it down the road. So we're going to explore those three different ways of doing that, and let's do that now. Okay, so now let's go at those three in perhaps reverse order. Let's start with the purely electronic instrument. This can be a synthesizer, or it could be a more hybrid instrument like an electric guitar, where, as I said, the electric part of it is not actually being made by the analog sound vibration of the string. It's being made by the electromechanical vibration of a metal string in a magnetic field. Okay, so to that end, I kind of do consider that an electrical instrument. Certainly any synthesizer is an electronic instrument, from the earliest of it being the theremin through any of the different ways of synthesizing music. How are you going to create and then hear that sound? First and foremost, it needs power, particularly if it's an active device. A synthesizer that uses oscillators, a theremin where you're affecting a radiomagnetic field, must have some source of power. That power could be AC, it could be DC, it could be battery-based DC, but it needs a power source. Certain microphones, likewise, will need a power source. If it's a condenser mic, it needs to have some form of power as well. Okay. Others, like a dynamic mic, or like the aforementioned electric guitar, might use what are called passive pickups. In that case, it's the magnetic thing itself that will create the electrical signal or electronic signal that can then be amplified and output. But in the case of a pure synthesizer, be it a subtractive synth, an additive synth, a waveform synth, any wavetable synth, any of those, they need to have a source of power. So that we're going to go in depth into that much later about how you power it, what the power requirements are, what the differences in power could do, how power could actually change the tone of your device. But just know, if I'm talking electronic music, I need power from somewhere. So assuming I have the power, now it is creating a signal, an electronic signal, an electronic analog to that waveform that I'm going to want to hear a sound. Now maybe that analog is actually a digitally drawn waveform with some stair-stepping and it uses anti-aliasing, but it's still an analog for the sound. It's not the sound itself, but it is a representation of that sound that will then let us eventually hear that sound. So to get to that step, then to the next step where we're hearing it, requires some form of amplification and output. Okay. So the amplification is using circuits like a VCA, a voltage-controlled amplifier, an op-amp, some other form of amplification electronically that is going to take that lower signal and boost it. And then it has to feed it through to, if you're a Rocky Horror fan, get ready for the word you've always heard, a sonic transducer. Yes, there are actually sonic transducers. No, they are not alien tech. Sonic transducers are things that convert between electrical energy and mechanical energy, aka moving airwaves, or creating what we like to call sound. What is an electronic transducer? A microphone or a speaker are both electronic transducers. So in this case, we're going to go through amplification to an electronic transducer, aka a speaker, whereby vibrating the cone or moving a planar membrane or vibrating a planar ribbon or exciting a curved dome, we're going to move air molecules in a compression back and forth wave that we know as sound based on the electronic input having been amplified and fed through to the speaker. That, by the way, will be the same whether we are talking a strictly electronic instrument or even an acoustic instrument that we're miking or an electromechanical instrument that we're amplifying. We're going to some point amplify, boost the signal, and transduce the signal so that we're moving a speaker back and forth. Now that speaker might be a very tiny one we put in our ears or larger ones we put over our ears, but no matter what, if we're perceiving it as sound, it's moving air. Okay? Critical, and we'll do a much deeper dive on this if you'd like, but the saying that people often will throw out, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? That's not a colloquialism. It's actually a very serious scientific inquiry that we have an answer to. And you're going to want to disagree with this answer. I know that. I can see the comments already. But I promise you, the official answer is no. To officially have sound requires three things. Something to create the sound, a medium for the sound to travel through, and a receiver to hear or pick up the sound. If a tree falls in the forest and a microphone is there, does it make a sound? Yes. If an animal is there, as I always hear, what if I'm not, but there's a chipmunk? To the chipmunk, it made a sound. To you, who is not there, it did not. If you have a video camera feed that does not have a microphone hooked into it, it still didn't make a sound because there wasn't a receiver for that sound. So, needs a receiver, needs a creation thing. Again, we went over that. Could be a vibrating string, a struck object, vibrating vocal cords, air moving through pipes, reeds vibrating, all sorts of resonance and wave creating things, or electrical or electronic oscillators, magnetic pickups. But it needs something to create that initial wave or sound. And then it needs a transmission medium. Everyone's favorite movie slogan, "In space, no one can hear you scream," is, well, true, because you can't have sound in space because it's a vacuum. With nothing to vibrate, nothing to create a compression wave in, there is no sound. Even if there is something to make it and something to hear it, it needs something to move through. For most of us, most of the time, that's air. I'm vibrating the air in a compression back and forth fashion to create sound. Can it go through other media? Absolutely. The old trick of knowing if a train is coming, please don't anyone ever do this anymore, but by holding your ear to the rail, yeah, it works. Because you're hearing the vibrations transmitted through a solid, in this case, the metal rail. Sound will move through solids. It propagates differently, it reflects differently, it moves at different speeds. But it does move through it. It's why when you're underwater in a pool, you can hear sound. Maybe not sound above as well. But what if the sound source is underwater as well, like an underwater speaker? Then you could hear it really great. I know there's some clubs in some places, day clubs in Vegas even, that will do little gimmicks where if you're underwater, you hear one sound, and if you're above water, you hear a totally different one. That's actually fairly easy to do due to the difference in the boundary layer between air and water and how the sound transmits between the two. But even talking in this room, I'm not only vibrating the air, I'm vibrating the camera lens ever so slightly. I'm vibrating Daniel. Boy, that sounds weird, but he's back there at the camera looking at me funny. And I'm vibrating the glass window panes behind me. This, by the way, is how certain spy technology like laser mics work, where I could shine a laser mic at a glass surface and hear anything being said in the room. It's still a transmission medium. So I need something to create it, something for it to move through, something to hear it. Electronic, taking an electronically generated wave or a magnetically generated wave or an acoustic wave picked up and converted to electronic, transduced the other way by a microphone or some other device. And I'm amplifying it electronically to go to the other type of transducer, a speaker. So it's going to output at a higher volume. There are also acoustic ways of amplification. The old-fashioned bullhorn where it was nothing but an acoustic thing of you doing this. You probably hear my voice change, but also probably got a little louder. That works. That's an acoustic form of amplification. It's what the resonator chamber of a guitar is doing. It's amplifying it. It's why a resonator guitar with a steel resonator is greater amplification than a hollow wooden body. It's why a semi-hollow body guitar makes more of an acoustic sound, or a full hollow body guitar, than a purely electric one. In a piano, the strings themselves vibrate. They vibrate on a metal harp, but there's a wooden soundboard that then adds its tone and amplification to that sound. So amplification can be acoustic or electric. So now, and Daniel might put this as a separate one, I don't know if he does. I really apologize to anyone about to hear this. But here comes Schecky the Techie's terrible dad jokes. So a person is sitting in a park, and the park happens to have a band shell. And they notice that there's kids playing near the band shell and running up and down and jumping on the stage and jumping off the stage. No performance is going on. And when the kids are on stage, they yell into the band shell and they hear it echo, 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 echo. Their screams and their little squeals and cries, they're all echoing off the band shell. We hear it. And they go, oh, that's interesting. In fact, someone's walking a dog and the dog's walking near the focal point of the band shell and the dog barks and you hear the bark amplified and echo. It's acoustically amplified. It's amazing. We're hearing these echoes. A cat runs by being chased by the dog. Meow. We hear it. A bird, a duck, walks up. Quack, 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 quack. Maybe a little songbird. Tweet, 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 tweet. Everything is being reflected by the band shell and amplified out towards us until a pigeon walks up. And the pigeon goes ahead and makes that pigeon noise. Coo. No echo. Person's very confused. Quack, quacked. Tweet, tweeted. Bark, barked. Pigeon goes again. Coo. No echo. Baffled by this, they go to their physics professor and they tell them there was a shape. It seemed to amplify the sound. And I heard the kids, and I heard the dog, and I heard the cat. I heard a duck quack, and I heard songbirds tweet. But when that pigeon went up and went, coo, I didn't hear it anymore. How is that at all possible? And the professor smiles and goes, obviously, a coo sticks. I apologize for how bad that was. But there is the Schecky bad dad joke of the day. So that's what we were talking about, amplification, whether it's acoustic amplification or electronic amplification. That was thing one. Thing one was hearing the electronic, which is the same as amplification once you generate that electronic signal. How a synthesizer generates an electronic signal is very different than how an electric guitar does, where it's electromechanically. In the case of an electronic instrument, it's purely electronic. And it normally involves things like oscillators, filters, and a lot of electronic components, capacitors, diodes, etc. We'll go much more in depth about that, but know that there is a process by which electronic circuits fed power in the right order through the right circuit components can create oscillations that can then be amplified and output as sound. So that's your electronic instrument creating sound. That's your amplification of existing sound. So the last one is recording sound. How are we going to do that? Well, mechanically, Edison had figured that out with the big horn down to the wax cylinder. Originally, it was cylinders for him. It was RCA, I believe, who first pioneered the phonograph. I could be wrong on that. If I am, I apologize. But it was the vibration of a needle etching an analog thing into wax, or later vinyl, that created the sound initially totally analog, totally acoustically. We have since moved on to where we often capture sound electronically, using things like microphones, or the amplified signal that the electronic instrument is outputting. That very same set amplified signal can be recorded somehow. How are we going to record it? Well, it has to go to a recording device. Those recording devices can be lathes that are moving needles and cutting, but generally you don't want to do that in real time. Edison's device did. We don't want to do that. More often, for a number of years, it was magnetic tape. Tape moving past the head, the magnetic signal gets excited. It's etched into the magnetic particles as an analog of that acoustic signal that it'll then recreate when played back through our transducer or speaker. We have since moved away from that in some cases and have moved on to digital recording, whether in your computer or DAW or a digital audio recorder, a personal digital recording device, something like this camcorder that I'm speaking into now. They are recording it electronically in a digital form. All the digital means is it's taking that waveform that's coming in, transducing it into an electrical signal, and then quantizing, sampling that electrical signal multiple times per second, thousands of times per second, and giving it a numeric value that could then be recorded and stored, such that when that numeric value is then played back, it can be converted back into the analog waveform, which can then be amplified and output. How do you do that with modern stuff? Well, as I said, if it's something acoustic, you're going to need a microphone or a pickup or a contact mic. If it's something like a guitar, you might need an inline amplifier or an amp simulator or a cab simulator or an amp and cab simulator that you're taking that mechanical vibration out and in as a signal that you could then amplify and record. If it's purely electronic, Maybe it can actually come out digitally. There are some devices that internally will do the digital conversion or are already digital and don't need any conversion and can send those out to a computer or recording device. But in most cases, it's going to convert it to an analog, electrical, or electronic signal that's then going to come into an interface. We've already done a brief thing on interfaces. We're going to do a lot more. We went over those 3 different audio levels, that being mic, instrument, and line, how they have different voltages and different impedances. All of that matters because we're going to go into a device to convert or store that signal. And in most cases, that's your audio interface. So whether you're using hundreds of channels, whether you're using all digital or digital and analog hybrid, whether you're using a single device, a single microphone, an acoustic instrument picked up by a single microphone, an electrical instrument like an electric guitar directly into something called the DI box, or an amp and cab simulator, or an electronic instrument like a synth directly plugged from a line out into an interface. The purpose of that interface is converting that same electrical electronic signal into a format that can be recorded. Okay? And so that's what we're doing, is recording sound with an interface. In the modern era, those interfaces can be as little as 1 channel to as many as, I think the most is 48 channels on a single interface, but you can then stack multiple interfaces to increase it even more. I have several up there that are 26 and 32. Down here I'm using mixers with electronic digital RIOs, which stands for remote input output, and those have as many as 32 ins and 32 outs on them as well. So it's taking in that electronic or electrical signal and converting it to digital to send to a mixer. Okay, or which the mixer can also act as an interface in some cases. In this case, it does as well. Okay, so you're going to have an interface no matter what. How's that interface going to interface with the computer? Back in the day, FireWire was popular for a while, but FireWire support has all but expired. Mac was the big proponent of it, and they have abandoned it. Mac software no longer supports FireWire. As a result, if you want FireWire devices or you still have them, you kind of have to do some hacking or use an Arduino. There are ways around it, but it's pretty much an obsolete format now. The most common way to nowadays is either through USB or Thunderbolt. There are some differences there. We can explore that. But that's what the interface is going to do. It's going to take in an electrical signal. It might have to convert that electrical signal. It might have a preamp to convert a mic level signal to a higher level line level signal for both output for amplification and for input into the computer for recording. Okay. So it's going to do some conversion, some processing perhaps. Maybe it has a compressor in it, a limiter, an EQ. There might be some processing in the analog stage, or perhaps it's just going to purely capture that analog stage and do the processing in the digital stage. But eventually, it's going to turn that analog electronic waveform by sampling it thousands of times per second, very commonly 44.1 or 48,000 times a second, 48 kilohertz, into that digital number stream that it is then going to send over a USB port or over a Thunderbolt cable into your computer so that using your DAW, digital audio workstation, you could then record it. So that's the very basics. And it doesn't matter if you have one device, one microphone, one cheap interface, the built-in interface of your computer. The theory and practice of it is identical to the most expensive, esoteric, bespoke, handmade tube amplifiers and Burr Brown converters and DACs, digital audio converters, or ADCs, analog to digital converters. It is the same process. Are there differences in quality, perceived quality, sound, harmonics, distortion? Absolutely. If there wasn't, boy, we'd all be really insane if we're spending so much more when we could spend so much less. Is it as significant as certain people claim? Well, we'll address that, and that becomes a fascinating topic that I'm sure I could get lots of hate mail and flame on based on what I say. But it is a topic we'll discuss. But just know that is the very basics of what is sound. Again, something to create a vibration, a medium compressible for it to travel through, and a receiver to hear it. That can lead to some interesting philosophical debates, which we might get into very shortly, hint, hint, about if sound is recorded, even as an analog on a wax cylinder, is that sound? I think the argument could be made, no, it's not. It was sound when it was captured. It'll be sound when it's played back, but even those bumps and ridges are not sound. They're mechanical bumps and ridges. If it's a digital file, a stream of zeros and ones, is that sound? No, it's actually not. At least I would argue that. So we could get into more of the theory or philosophy of what is sound, when is it sound, when is it not sound. But no matter what, those are the three things you're going to do with sound. You're either going to create it electrically or electronically. You're going to amplify it either acoustically or electronically. Yes, even a pigeon's coo can be amplified that way. And you're going to possibly record it. And in recording it and or amplifying it, there's a whole process of distributing it. Okay, if you're working in a studio environment, perhaps I need to hear certain sounds in my headphones while I'm creating other sounds so that they can interact. Perhaps other band members need different mixes. There's monitor mixing, there's front of house if they're doing a live performance. All of that stuff. But it all falls into one of two categories. Either I'm amplifying or I'm recording. And then the only other thing is, am I creating the signal or am I affecting the signal? Because the other place where we could send that electronic signal is to a device that affects it. Just as doing this is an acoustic effect, electronic devices can electronically affect the sound to add reverb, delay, chorus, flanging. The list goes on infinitely. But that hopefully gives you a bit of a better understanding and hopefully a bit more of a parallel so that you're not looking at this insanity going, yeah, I'm never going to have 341 cents. I'm never going to need to hook all this up or do structured wiring like Schecky's talking about. Hell, I don't think I need a patch panel. I'm still going to argue you do. We'll have that argument. But I might want to record what I'm saying. I might want to record an instrument. I might want to edit that recording or layer or play back. I might want to perform live and amplify that. Well, all of that falls under the technology of sound, and sound is just one of the concepts that we're going to explore here on Schecky the Techie. We're going to go into light and lighting. We're going to go into optics and photometry. We're going to go into digital files and file generation of video signals. There's a ton of tech we can discuss, and I want your input. What do you want to learn more about? But if your interest is sound, hopefully that was a good sampler, a primer on what you need to know to understand how it applies to you and where we're going to go from there. See you next time.